What is going on, you guys? For this episode of the Rockney Cast, I'm going to ask one basic question, which is, if I begin intermittent fasting, will I constantly be hangry? This is probably the most frequent question I get, and I'm here to answer that question. And so we're going to cover a Harvard press release relating to this question, my research into some of what the peer-reviewed literature says, as well as my own personal experience. I've been fasting now for 2 years, and I'm going to also give you a little bit of a hack in terms of what you can do if you're new to fasting, and also give you a little bit of an idea why you think you're going to constantly be hungry, and you really won't once you start fasting. Because I think this pretty much is the key reason why people don't fast. They're like, oh my gosh, if I fast, I'm going to be constantly tired. And their buddy's going to say, yeah, remember that time where you didn't eat breakfast and how angry you were? Or you may have like an uncle that's like, oh my God, I haven't been fed. I'm hungry. I haven't had my Cheerios. God damn it. Give me my food. So I'm going to explain why you will not actually be hungry, and in fact, why you will feel great once you begin to fast. And so the first issue that I think frequently comes up when people think about fasting is, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so hungry. Why is that? Well, one, it's their own experience. When they haven't eaten for a while, they feel hangry and they experience, and they're the ultimate experts in them. But the other thing is you get a lot of information. I think it's actually misinformation by really seemingly smart people that turns out to, in my view, be nearly 100% wrong, and nearly always be by people who have never fasted themselves. And here I'm actually going to take on Harvard, that institution of really, really smart people. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I actually have friends that were smart enough to get into Harvard. Like, I would never be able to get into Harvard. Like, I'm lucky to get into the college that I did. I did get into law school, so I'm not totally dumb. No way could I get it. And my friends that have gotten to Harvard, they're like really smart. So I'm not like criticizing Harvard, but sometimes I gotta say, Harvard people, you say some real dumbass things. And I'm referring, you, Harvard, you're wrong sometime. And you're giving, I think, drastic misinformation about hunger and fasting. So I'm referring to a December 4th press release from the Harvard Medical School. And they do these things where they give out all like health advice, and some of it's good, some of it's bad, but it's not as good as what you think it would be given that it's from Harvard. They were talking about the side effects of intermittent fasting. And they said, there's 4 reasons why you may not want to intermittent fast. And I kind of agree with the last one. So I'm going to essentially punt. 1, intermittent fasting may make you feel sick. Number 2, it may cause you to overeat. Number 3, they made a real dumbass thing that it says it may cause older adults to lose too much weight. That has to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And number 4, and this is one where, if you do have any unique medical issues, the Harvard people are actually right on this, which is if you're taking medications or you got some super, anything related to food and medication that you're on a protocol with your doc, obviously check with your doc to make sure that it's okay if you fast, because it's obviously going to affect that. So that's number 4. It may be dangerous if you're taking prescribed medications. Well, so Harvard, you get an F on this one because you're freaking wrong on 3 out of 4. And the 4th one, it's kind of like a duh. One of the things I've always said is that I have a JD, a Juris Doctorate. I'm not a doctor, but I can read and I can assess evidence and I can make up my own mind. And that's what all of us have to do. We all have to make up our own mind in terms of whether we're going to do something. I've been fasting now for 2 years, and I can share with you my experience. And I've researched a lot into it, and I've looked into it, and it is freaking awesome. So, and not only am I going to say, I'm going to, oh my God, there's a whistle that's going off. Sorry, people. I live in a small town and they do the 12 o'clock whistle every day. So I'm recording this at 12 o'clock. And it's kind of annoying, but this is what you get when you live in a town of like 900. They do these daily whistles and it's kind of annoying. But in any event, that's why we had to stop the video temporarily. But so anyway, I was talking about how Harvard people are actually totally wrong. It feels kind of good because I wasn't smart enough to get, I didn't even try to apply to Harvard. I did get recruited to play at Dartmouth, but I didn't get in. So maybe I just have some Ivy League MBA. I'm like, hey, maybe if I had gone to Harvard, I'd be like, oh yeah, this press release is totally great. But no, I'm seriously, 3 out of 4 of this press release from Harvard related to fasting are totally wrong. So these Harvard people get an F. Yeah, it feels good to say that, Harvard. You got it totally wrong. So why is this? And I think this is the key barrier, and it really pisses me off that Harvard is giving this misinformation relating to fasting, because it is totally and 100 unequivocally sick. And it's not sick, it's false. It will not make you feel sick, and it will not make you feel hangry over time. And you may say like, yeah, but I've tried fasting and I couldn't do it because it was too hard. And I got scared and I couldn't do it. And I remember how much it hurt. So here's why you think the Harvard people are right. Because as your body, most likely you're probably eating a lot of garbage. And if you're like a lot of people, one of the things, so when you do a fasting protocol, typically the easiest thing to start with is what's called a 16-8 protocol, which where you're not eating for 16 hours and you have an 8-hour eating window. And I remember when I started fasting, I was like, oh my God, that sounds so hard. It's so easy. Like you would not, in fact, now I'm like, I do a 24-hour fast, like no prob. My record is a 48. I think I'm gonna do a 72-hour here pretty soon too. So I don't know, we'll see, but it's freaking awesome. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, he has an eating disorder. But no, I don't. It is very healthy way to eat, and I've never been healthy. Like all my metabolic markers are way better. My blood sugars, my blood pressure. Done a whole bunch of episodes on this. So that's why it kind of pees me off that the Harvard people are saying it's going to make you really essentially it can make you feel tired and irritable and lethargy. So here's why I think that they're saying this, because certainly if you a lot of times these studies that you see relating to fasting, they get people with no experience with fasting. So it does take a while for your body to adapt to fasting, and especially if you're used to eating a carb drenched breakfast, which a lot of people are, that is usually where you're going to see the hunger, because carb, what it does, especially if it's a refined carb, is that it will jack your insulin, which is great. And it does that and also jacks your blood sugars up, right? So, and if it's really refined, then your insulin goes up to be able to absorb it. And then you get a blood sugar crash, and your body doesn't feel fed, and you may be insulin resistant. So you need more and more insulin, so you feel even hungrier. So this is you get into this sort of constant state of essentially feeling hangry when you're addicted to carbs. And so if you have people with no experience with fasting and they're eating a carb drenched diet, they will feel hangry. Now, in my experience, and based upon other friends of mine that have tried fasting, that it really comes down to the first couple days of intermittent fast are the hardest. If you can get into day 4, 5, and 6, you will not feel hungry and you will feel really good. And some of you Harvard people may be saying like, oh, this is why I couldn't get into Harvard. We do peer-reviewed research. We just don't rely on observation like you who couldn't get into even Dartmouth, that's an Ivy League school. Yes, well, here's my response to that. Well, I do have some journal articles. Maybe I'm not as smart as you, but I do have some journal articles. And I'm going to cite 3 journal articles that address this issue relating to hunger and fasting. and whether you're going to feel hangry and miserable all the time with fasting. If anything, it's going to be the opposite. So first off, I'm just going to offer you a little 2+2 for you Harvard people. There's a so basically, if you're eating a high glycemic, sugary, carb-drenched diet, you're going to feel more frequently hungry, and you're going to feel worse. And it's going to be harder to do intermittent fasting. So if you are going to start doing intermittent fasting and you have very little willpower, what I would do is get any random clean keto book. There's a lot of good books. Watch anything by Dr. Eric Berg on YouTube. It's all really good. And it's basically vegetables, cruciferous vegetables like cauliflower, broccoli, spinach, your meats, your eggs. There's a lot of good keto. Just get anyone off of Amazon. Start with clean keto, and you'll essentially get much more resilient and nutrient dense foods. It'll be easier to go for long periods of time without eating, which will prevent this hangriness issue. And for those of you who probably already know this, but I think a lot of times they talk about people being hangry or why people don't think they can do fasting, because they're existing in this high carb world. And there's a 2013 American Journal of Clinical Nutrition study. And essentially the researchers gave people two types of foods. One where they called a high glycemic index of foods, those that create a significant rise in blood sugar, and a meal of low glycemic index food, which have less of an effect on blood sugar. They found that after a high GI meal, subjects were hungrier and showed greater activity in brain regions associated with craving and reward. People that have been in the keto space, like they've literally known this for like at least 60 years. And people that of traditional religions, they've known this for like thousands of years, and they just figured this out in like 2013. So it is absolutely the case that if you are eating a lot of potato chips, you're getting up with a donut, you're engaging in this hunger cycle, which is going to make you feel really hungry if you food restrict. So that's sort of the first response that I have to this feeling miserable. You don't. But I'm going to take a little bit of a step further. Not only will you not feel miserable, you'll actually feel great. I mean, you will feel awesome. And here I'm going to start with an article from Slate. It's not peer reviewed, but it is really true. The issue with fasting is not that you're going to feel like shit. My sister doesn't like it when I swear, but I needed to there. You're going to feel great. And in fact, there's actually an article from Slate, 2013, and here's the title of the article. They say, "Why does fasting make you feel like you're high?" Mary Elizabeth Williams, March 13th, 2022. No, I don't think this is the same Mary Elizabeth Williams that was on my podcast, who's also an opera singer. If it is, kudos to you. You're like fasting, getting like a high feeling. But you do. You feel really good and your mind feels clear. And they quote an actual doctor. That's right. I'm not a doctor, but there are a lot of good doctors that actually understand fasting. Danielle Calvis is a physician and contributor for Contacts Compare, and she's cited in this Slate article, March 13th of 2022. So it's like a real recent article. And she talks about fasting, its connection to Buddhism, which is really cool. She talks about the impact. I picture her sounding like this. She probably talks like a wellness coach. And she talks about the impact of intermittent fasting on their own lives. Then she quotes Buddha. She's like, in the Anapanasati Sutta, she says, the Buddha talks about 5 grades of rapture when the student participates in fasting and meditation. Rapture is born from tireless energy, investigation, and inquiry into the nature of hunger states. The student learns to see how hunger arises and passes away in the mind, which leads to wisdom. This mind state comes with intense, pleasurable interest and luminosity. Oh, you can almost hear her orgasm as she's thinking about fasting. I mean, it's really that. I mean, it's it's not that good. So you're probably saying like, oh my God, like, am I going to get high? Like, what the hell? I'm not Buddhist. Am I going to feel as good? Yes, you are. And I'm going to get a little bit into sort of the neurological reasons for this. And this is really one of the surprising things when people criticize. So here I'm basically sort of two branches that we're looking at. One is the neurological basis for it, and then I'll share with you my own experience. And so far, I got to say, for people that actually know fasting, my experience has completely lined up with what the research tells me. So for whatever that's worth, and everyone who has engaged in fasting based upon my recommendation so far has repeated the same. So there is a neurological basis for why we feel so good for fasting. So for example, right now, the last meal that I had was at 8:30 last night after I did actually a 26-hour fast. I was going to do a 36-hour fast, except I had a meeting with my siblings and we kind of got into an argument. So I thought, what the heck? I'm going to break my fast. So I did like a 26-hour fast and then I had a meal. I did not overeat, by the way. And so I stopped eating around 8:30. And so right now, I mean, basically I'm on, it's like a 16 hours is basically where I'm at. I feel great. So you're like, oh my gosh, that's just him. No, this is how you feel when you fast. You feel your mind feels clear. You do not feel hangry. I promise you, you don't. In fact, you feel really, really good. And there's actually been peer-reviewed research for you Harvard people, because people are like, oh my God, who is this guy? He couldn't get into Harvard, so he's just jealous, We have peer-reviewed research. Well, here's some peer-reviewed research. It's from China. It is the Journal of Current Neuropharmacology. And this is a great article. I think it's one of these, essentially, what do they call these meta reviews, where they look at all the research on the impact of caloric restriction with neurological and its impact on treatment for depression and anxiety. And it's a very good art because it really goes over neurological basis for why we feel so good when we fast. And not only that, but it also talks about it as a technique for fasting, for addressing even stuff like depression. And it's really interesting. It sort of references the history of psychiatric disorders. It says that major depression is one of the most frequent neurological disorders. And they get into sort of the why question of it. And it's kind of interesting when they use some of I kind of laugh out loud during these drug writers, the way that they write. It's kind of funny how they actually write. They talk about depression being a very common issue. That's called, and the title of this article, by the way, is called The Effects of Calorie Restriction in Depression and Potential Mechanisms. And I'll post a link down below. I haven't figured out how to do all those like happy little graphics. This is going to kind of be low budge YouTube. So it says that based upon these, so they talk about all the people that are depressed. They said to date, a large number of studies have devoted great attention to this problematic conditions. Then it says, based upon these theories, many antidepressants have been developed for these treatment of depression. Yet, they say, the depressed patients are often refractory to the antidepressant therapies. Refractory? Who the hell talks that way? Refractory? In other words, shit doesn't work. And I'm very skeptical of the efficacy of a lot of these drugs and a lot of the approach that a lot of psychiatrists use to these drugs. And you may say like, oh, well, you're not a doctor. Well, I mean, here's why. I do think, and it just based on my experience with the fasting and food and exercise and sleep, at the very least, these are very powerful factors that impact your mental health and have made me feel great. And I just think a lot of these, imagine you have all these complicated factors in terms of your neurochemistry. And then the guy's like, here's a pill, man, get the hell out of my office while I go, have a relationship with my secretary. So why am I talking like that? I have no idea why. But so they're saying that they're refractory to traditional treatment. And then they get into the mental health treatments. And there actually have been studies on fasting and depression, fasting and anxiety. And they get into why that is. Um, and they indicate this is obviously a complicated issue. He talks about the pathophysiology of major depressive disorder seems extremely complicated. They talk about their limited understanding of the depression etiology. Current treatment remains suboptimal. And I don't know if you've had any friends or family members that have taken these psychiatric drugs for anxiety and depression, which usually are sort of two sides of the same coin. They talk about complete remission only occurs in less than half of cases. And even the cases of antidepressant reagents are effective, depressed patients often succumb to an immediate lapse of depression after drug withdrawal. And that's been consistent with what I've been able to observe. Obviously, in order to get approved, assuming the FDA wasn't bought off, which they weren't, I trust the FDA mostly. They had to go through some double-blind, process to ensure that the control group, that they had a placebo group, and then they used the drug like, Prozac, and they would have had to have a statistically significant difference to justify it being prescribed as a drug. So I'm not saying that there's no benefit to it, but think about that. Half, this is what the authors quote, is that nearly half of the complete remission occurs in less than half. And if you go into a doctor and you're like, what's your chance of success? And they're like, well, I'm really successful about half the time. What the hell? I mean, you go to a pilot, like, when you fly this plane, how often does it crash? Oh, about half the time. It's good enough. No, you wouldn't accept that. And so they've really looked at what some of these alternative approaches with fasting. And the fasting has been fairly effective. So I think it's a good thing to try. And here I'm also going to talk, let me give you a little hint of later on what I'm going to talk about in terms of a really good fasting protocol to do that will make you feel really good. But so they've looked at this question, and then they talk about, well, what are some of these studies and some of the neurology behind that. And they cite essentially a study involving older men that was done relating to a fasting control group and a non-fasting control group. And this study was actually done in the Journal of Nutritional Health Aging. And the title of the article is Efficacy of Fasting and Caloric Restriction on Mood and Depression Among Aging Men. And they looked at essentially a total of 32 healthy males age 59 plus or minus 6 years. So they were already, and they had a BMI of 26.7, so just barely slightly overweight. And so they broke down these older dudes into two groups. One was to do intermittent fasting, and the other was to essentially just maintain their typical lifestyle and diet that they were using. And the mood was assessed using the profile of mood states, and depression was assessed using the Beck Depression Inventory 2 and geriatric depression scale at 15 of baseline, in week 6 and week 12 of the intervention. So essentially, it was a 3-month study on that. And here basically are the results of that study. For the group that was using the intermittent fasting, they found that significant decreases in tension, anger, confusion, and total mood disturbance, and improvements in vigor were observed in the participants in the fasting group, as opposed to the control group. And one of the things they said relating to depression, they did say no significant changes in mean depression scores were observed. But here's what they also said. In the calorie group, they said that the weight, BMI, and percent body fat were reduced by 3.8, 3.7, and 5.7%, essentially in the fasting group. So that's very significant. And so what they say is that their findings show that fasting protocol, intermittent fasting, is effective in improving mood states and nutritional status among aging men. So why is fasting so effective in making you feel really good? Well, it has to do with the release of endogenous endorphins. What are the endorphins? You know those things, how good you feel when you exercise? It's actually a kind of opiate. And it makes you feel euphoric, and it also makes you resistant to pain. So it's just like this miracle drug that you already have within you. And multiple studies have shown that when you restrict calories over time, you stimulate endogenous, you essentially stimulate endogenous endorphins within your body. And that a lot of studies have shown this. And here are the authors. And here I'm back to the current neuropharmacological article on the effects of calorie restriction in depression potential mechanisms. Well, they note that there have been multiple rat studies that say that rat fasting levels of endogenous opiate production increased after 5 to 10 days of fasting. And I would just say anecdotally, again, N of 1, you do feel really good. And there's actually a lot of research on, a lot of people essentially report the same thing. They're saying that they don't have any other research on this, but it makes sense if you think about it. If you're fasting for an extended period of time, would you feel like crap or would you feel really good? You feel really good because it's the body's way of saying, hey, get moving, man. You need to get some food. But it gets better. Not only does it stimulate endorphins, those little opiates within your body, it also stimulates a whole bunch of other things. Of course, eventually it does stimulate what essentially a hormone called orexin, which is essentially, what is orexin? It's a neuropeptide involved in the regulation of feeding behavior, sleep wakefulness rhythm, and neuroendocrine homeostasis. It basically stimulates you to be awake. So it's one of the many reasons why you feel like you have so much energy when you fast, because, and again, doesn't that make sense? If you don't have food, would you feel like crap, or would you go out and hunt food? And so they note that. There's a lot of research related to that. But it also gets better, that in addition to stimulating this orexin, it also stimulates when you do feed what they call essentially brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. Now, this is something that, and I'll define this here. BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, plays an important role in neuronal survival and growth, serves as a neurotransmitter modulator, and results in neuronal plasticity, which is essential for learning and memory. So neuronal plasticity means that you can learn. It makes you smarter. It makes you cognitively more active. And that's something that has been shown over and over and over again, that your BDNF is stimulated by fasting as well. So not only does it not make you feel bad, it makes you feel really, really good. And this is just a small sampling of the experience that I have with fasting, and just a small sampling of the research. There's tons of research out there. I am going to do more episodes on fasting. So you feel really great when you fast. You do not feel hangry. And so I don't know where the hell the only thing I can hypothesize for these smart Harvard people to get it so wrong that it may make you feel sick. It's kind of like when you start keto. When you start keto, you can get like the keto flu as your body starts adapting to not having carbs all the time. You're not getting the blood. You're basically getting off the roller coaster where you're like, oh my God, I'm hungry. I need to eat. Then I'm full. And then all of a sudden you feel good for a while. Then you have a blood sugar spike and then a crash. Then you need to eat again so that you can all of a sudden get more food. So that's one of the reasons why you're always hungry all the time. And then your body rhythmically reacts to that and emits something called Ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone based upon a periodic adaptation to how frequently you're eating. Your body does this. I've been fasting now for basically about 2 years, as I indicated. I'm never hungry for breakfast, ever, because my body knows I just don't eat in the morning. So if it knows that it's not going to get fed, it doesn't send me the hormone, the hunger hormone. So I don't get hungry, and I don't overeat too. So I don't know where the hell they get that. Anyone who fasts, you become more insulin sensitive, especially if you couple it with ketogenic diet. You're going to feel really, really good. Now, I'm keto-ish, and I'll do a separate episode on why I think it's better to be keto-ish. But I don't know where these Harvard people get this. It does not cause you to overeat. And it may be what they're thinking. If you're living in a carb-drenched world and you're used to eating very frequently, it is true. You get very agitated when you're not eating and you're during this period of adaptation. And if you're doing that every single day via calorie restriction, there's actually a lot of research on this, then yes, you're constantly craving and thinking about food. Remember, it is stimulating your craving hormones, especially if you are on this carb cycle. Yeah, under those circumstances, you will. And again, during this first couple days, you will feel hangry. But in the long term, you won't, and they don't study it. And here they have Dr. Frank Hu. So he must be really, I mean, he's at Harvard, so he must know, but I kind of feel like Dr. Hu is sort of like this Kathy McManus, who's this dietitian. Why is every dietitian named Kathy or Betty? Kathy, so Kathy's like, oh yeah, it's really risky, and then it's Dr. Frank Hu. Mr. Hu says that it's human nature for people to want to reward themselves after doing very hard work, such as exercise or fasting for a long period of time. So there is a danger of indulging in unhealthy dietary habits on non-fasting days. So I kind of feel like Dr. Hu just pulled this out of his ass. I don't know where he's getting this. That does not happen. If you've never fasted, that can happen. If people have an eating disorder, that can happen. If people have essentially a carb-drenched lifestyle and they're on this roller coaster, that can absolutely happen. But anyone who has fasted, and especially coupled it with a ketogenic diet, is not going to feel that way, and you're not going to overeat. Trust me, you don't gorge yourself. I've done multiple episodes on this. You won't gorge yourself. And in fact, you'll get a healthier relationship to food as far as that goes. So Harvard, check number 2, you're totally wrong. And Dr. Frank Hu, I'm sure in fact, I'm going to check. I just had an inspiration. I'm going to check and see Dr. Frank Hu, whether he's still at Harvard or like whether he has anything else. So like what his specialty is other than, oh shit. I see he's the Department of Nutrition at Harvard Chan School of Public Health. So Dr. Hu, I hope no one tells you about this, but you're totally wrong on that. You're the head of the Department of Nutrition and you're at Harvard? Well, you're wrong. And then number 3, this has to be the most inane thing that I think I've ever heard of, maybe of all time, and it comes from this Harvard press release. It says intermittent fasting may cause older adults to lose too much weight. That's just dumb. It's not like with fasting that you just lose weight over time. Most of the people that start fasting are significantly overweight. Now, if you're at an ordinary weight, there are still reasons to fast in terms of just regulating your feeding cycle, getting your hormones in line, getting connected to your circadian rhythms. There's a ton of reasons to do it. And by the way, this is just a point of emphasis here. Sometimes people talk about calorie restriction and fasting as if they're the same thing. That is not the case. In some cases, fasting leads to calorie restriction, but not always. There's a case to be made that sometimes even a calorie neutral approach, you're still going to lose weight and you're still going to feel better. And there still are reasons to fast under those circumstances. But I think that they're wrong here. Like if they're losing weight too fast, you just eat more. It's not that hard, or you can regulate your fasting, which I very much encourage people to do, whether they want to do a 12-hour window, which used to be very standard at 16. I basically do a 18 to 20 hour state of fasting. Sometimes I'll eat twice a day. Occasionally I'll eat 3 times a day. I'm more flexible on the weekends. Once a quarter or so, I'll do a 24, 48-hour fast. But as you can see, I'm not wasting away. I still got a little bit of pudge, but I've lost like 60 pounds-ish. So, and I've kept it off for nearly 2 years. So I'm not worried about gaining weight, because once you learn how to fast, it's so freaking easy. So people, you will not, so to answer this question, you will not feel hangry. And here I'm going to give you a little tip if you're new to fasting. This is matcha tea. I did my previous one on matcha. So if you're just starting with fasting, one way to like address your hunger is just a little bit of matcha, a little tablespoon, which you can get at Walmart, the Walmart baking aisle. And then just heat up your water and essentially just stir it around with the hot water and put just a tiny bit of half and half. So technically breaks your fast, but not really. And it will address your hunger and you will feel really good. So you wouldn't even feel hangry. And the nice thing about matcha, remember my matcha one, is that my matcha podcast, that essentially what it does is it has caffeine and L-theanine in it. And so basically what it makes you feel intense and relaxed at the same time, which is also sometimes how you feel with fasting. So you'll feel great. So friends, you will not feel hangry. My recommendation is just go to Walmart or go to Amazon, just buy a clean keto book and just start with that. After you've started on keto for a couple weeks, then just start skipping breakfast. It's not that hard. Do a 16-hour fast. And then from there, once you get past those first 3 or 4 days, easy peasy, you will start losing weight. You will start feeling good. Your health will improve. I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh my God, is it too good to be true? No, it's not. You are going to feel great. You're going to look younger. You're going to get more ripped. And there's a lot of reason why that's the case. So that is this episode of the Rockney Cast. You will feel great if you engage in fasting. So I hope you found this episode helpful. I'm going to try to do more and more episodes on fasting, although I don't want it to be totally a fasting podcast because I got too many interests. The health ones tend to like get the most views, but I'm still going to do history and stuff. I'm kind of be like the History Channel, not about history. This is going to be like the fasting podcast where I talk about other topics as well. Those tend to bomb, but I like doing it. It's kind of like a solo artist that likes the slow song that the audience doesn't like. So I'm going to continue to do a lot of high quality content on fasting, my own experiences, my review of the peer reviewed literature, doctors that I really like, but I'll intermingle it with other good stuff too. So infinite gratitude for all of you who are tuning in. Hopefully you've made it this far. If you did, send me an email at rockneycast@gmail.com. Do subscribe to this podcast so we can continue to have high quality content. There are reasons why we need to have that. This also will be simulcast on all podcasting mediums, Spotify, Apple, and all places where podcasts are heard. Do give us a positive review, especially if you've made it for this far. You must have been entertained. So continue to spread the word of the Rockney Cast. I have infinite gratitude. I know there's a lot of choices out there, and the fact that you made it this far means a lot to me. But again, you're going to feel great when you fast, and you're going to feel great when you tune into the Rockney Cast. So we'll continue to put out great quality content for you on Friends of the Rockney Cast. So until next time on the Rockney Cast.